My name is Layla Hassan, and I've been in the corporate world long enough to know that it's not just about numbers or deals. It's about power. Power that shifts like sand under your feet, alliances that crumble when you least expect them, and betrayals that cut deeper than any blade. I'm an assistant director at Nexus Global, one of those sprawling multinational firms where everyone pretends they're on the same team but secretly jockey for position like gladiators in a coliseum. I was hired because I had something no one else did: fluency in Arabic. Not just conversational fluency either, native-level mastery. Honed over years of living between Cairo and Dubai before moving to New York City for my MBA. It wasn't just a skill, it became my identity within the company. When Nexus announced its biggest deal yet, a $7.5 billion acquisition with Al Mazir Enterprises, a powerhouse out of Abu Dhabi, I was tapped as the only person who could bridge the cultural and linguistic gap between our boardroom suits and their traditional Bedouin-inspired leadership style. At first, I thought this would be my moment. The culmination of all those late nights poring over spreadsheets, the endless networking events where I smiled politely while clutching lukewarm wine, the sacrifices I made to climb higher up the ladder. But now, sitting here recounting everything, I realize how naive I was. Because what happened next wasn't just business, it was personal. The day we started preparing for the Al Mazir deal felt electric. Everyone buzzed around the office like bees swarming a hive. Our CEO, Marcus Langley, called us into the conference room, a sleek glass box perched on the 42nd floor overlooking Manhattan. He stood at the head of the table, his expensive watch catching the light as he gestured dramatically. "This," he said, pointing to the projection screen behind him displaying the Al Mazir logo, "is going to change everything." He went on about synergies and market expansion, but I tuned most of it out. What caught my attention was the way he glanced at me when he mentioned the importance of cultural sensitivity during negotiations. That look, a mix of acknowledgement and expectation, was both thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling because it meant I mattered. Terrifying because, if anything went wrong, I'd be the one holding the bag. Preparation began immediately. Teams were divided based on expertise: finance, legal, operations, marketing. And then there was me, floating somewhere between strategy and liaison duties. My role was nebulous, which suited me fine since I preferred operating behind the scenes anyway. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in research, devouring every article, report, and interview I could find on Al Mazir's founder, Sheikh Rashid Al Farhan, a man known for his sharp mind, impeccable manners, and unyielding pride in his heritage. I also spent hours crafting presentations tailored specifically for him. Every slide deck included subtle nods to Arabic culture, calligraphy-inspired fonts, references to shared values like honor and community. Even the color schemes were chosen carefully, favoring deep blues and golds reminiscent of desert skies. These details might have seemed trivial to others, but I knew better. In high-stakes negotiations, perception is reality, and I intended to make sure Sheikh Rashid saw us not just as partners, but as equals. As the weeks turned into months, momentum built. Meetings grew longer, emails more frequent. There were moments of tension, of course, disagreements over valuation models, debates about integration timelines. But through it all, I remained steadfast, ensuring that communication flowed smoothly despite language barriers and differing approaches to decision-making. People started noticing. Colleagues who once barely acknowledged my presence now sought my input. Executives nodded approvingly after calls with Sheikh Rashid, crediting my insights for keeping things on track. But success has a funny way of making people uncomfortable, especially in places like Nexus, where ambition festers like mold in damp corners. As the deal progressed, I began sensing whispers, small, insidious comments that pricked at my confidence. Someone joked about how I must have some secret connection to Al Mazir. Another muttered that my contributions were overhyped. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself these were just jealous murmurs from colleagues eager to claim credit for the hard work I'd put in. But deep down, doubt crept in. Was I truly valued or merely tolerated? Then came the meeting that changed everything. It was supposed to be routine, a final review session before flying to Abu Dhabi for the official signing ceremony. I arrived early, armed with binders full of notes and a laptop loaded with updated projections. The room filled quickly, executives taking their usual spots around the polished mahogany table. Marcus entered last, his expression unreadable as always. He began by summarizing key points, praising various team members for their efforts. Then, without warning, he turned to me. "Layla," he said, his tone clipped. "Can you explain why Sheikh Rashid requested additional concessions regarding intellectual property rights?" My stomach dropped. This wasn't part of the agenda. More importantly, it wasn't true. Sheikh Rashid hadn't asked for anything new. He'd approved the terms weeks ago. I opened my mouth to clarify, but Marcus cut me off. "We can't afford surprises at this stage," he continued, his voice rising slightly, "especially ones that could jeopardize the entire deal." Around the table, heads nodded solemnly. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others exchanged knowing glances. Panic bubbled inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Marcus, I assure you there hasn't been any request for changes," I replied firmly. "Sheikh Rashid confirmed the IP clauses during our last call. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." Instead of addressing my response, Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Misunderstandings happen," he said finally, "but accountability matters more. If we lose this deal, someone will need to answer for it." The implication hung heavy in the air. Before I could protest further, another executive chimed in, suggesting alternative strategies to mitigate risks. The conversation moved on, leaving me sidelined, my rebuttal swallowed by the tide of voices determined to move forward. By the end of the meeting, I felt hollow, as though I'd been stripped bare in front of everyone. Worse still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a miscommunication, it was calculated. Someone wanted me discredited, and Marcus, whether knowingly or not, had played right into their hands. That evening, I stayed late in the office, replaying the day's events in my mind. Who could have planted that seed of doubt? And why now, when we were so close to sealing the deal? As I packed up to leave, a notification flashed across my phone screen. An email from HR requesting a meeting the following morning. My heart sank. Whatever storm was brewing, it seemed I was squarely in its path. Walking into the HR office the next morning felt surreal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the bland beige walls. I sat across from Linda Chin, the head of human resources, whose perpetually neutral expression gave nothing away. Beside her sat Marcus, arms crossed, jaw tight. Neither offered pleasantries as they launched straight into the reason for the meeting. "There have been concerns raised about your performance," Linda began, her voice clinical, "specifically regarding your ability to manage critical aspects of the Al Mercer deal." I blinked, stunned. "Concerns? From whom?" I demanded, leaning forward. "Because I haven't heard anything until today." Linda hesitated, glancing briefly at Marcus before continuing. "Confidentiality prevents us from disclosing sources. However, given the gravity of the situation and the potential impact on the company, we feel it's necessary to take immediate action." Immediate action. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Before I could respond, Marcus spoke up, his tone measured but firm. "Effective immediately, Layla. You're being relieved of your duties related to the Al Mercer deal. We'll assign someone else to handle communications and finalize preparations." Relieved of my duties. The phrase echoed in my mind, surreal and incomprehensible. All the months of tireless work, the sleepless nights, the countless hours spent building trust with Sheikh Rashid, all dismissed in a single sentence. Anger surged within me, hot and raw, but I bit it back. Losing my temper wouldn't help. "You're making a mistake," I said instead, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Whoever is feeding you false information doesn't understand the nuances of this negotiation. Removing me now will only create confusion and risk derailing everything." Marcus shook his head, almost pityingly. "We've already discussed contingencies. Trust me, Layla, this decision wasn't made lightly. But the stakes are too high to gamble on uncertainty." Uncertainty. That word stung more than anything else. They weren't firing me outright, not yet anyway, but sidelining me effectively amounted to the same thing. As I left the office, numb and reeling, I realized something even worse. Whoever orchestrated this didn't care about the truth. They cared about control, and they'd found the perfect way to assert it. Back at my desk, I stared blankly at the piles of documents I'd meticulously prepared. Hours passed in a blur as I tried to process what had happened. By mid-afternoon, rumors spread like wildfire through the office. Whispers followed me wherever I went, speculative eyes boring into my back. Some colleagues avoided me entirely, while others offered sympathetic smiles that felt more condescending than comforting. Word reached me that a senior associate named Greg Thompson had been appointed to replace me. Greg, whose knowledge of Arabic extended to ordering falafel and saying thank you in broken phonetics. I considered fighting back, writing a detailed memo outlining every interaction, every agreement reached with Sheikh Rashid, presenting undeniable evidence that contradicted the narrative being spun against me. But logic prevailed. In environments like Nexus, facts rarely mattered when emotions ran high. Perception trumped reality every time. Fighting would only paint me as desperate, vindictive, a liability rather than an asset. So I waited, watched as Greg clumsily navigated conversations with Sheikh Rashid, stumbling over cultural cues and misinterpreting subtle signals. Watched as tensions mounted during video conferences, polite smiles masking growing frustration. Watched as cracks began forming in the foundation of trust I'd worked so hard to build. And then, less than 24 hours after my removal, the unthinkable happened. The deal collapsed. News broke late in the afternoon, rippling through the office like a shockwave. Emails flooded inboxes. Phones rang incessantly and panicked executives scrambled to salvage what remained. Official statements blamed unforeseen complications and mutual disagreements, but the truth was murkier. Sources close to Al Mazir hinted at strained relations caused by abrupt changes in personnel and perceived disrespect toward Sheikh Rashid's leadership style. Translation, they felt betrayed. For Nexus, the fallout was catastrophic. Stock prices plummeted overnight, investors panicked, and media outlets pounced on the story with glee. Analysts dissected every detail, speculating wildly about internal dysfunction and poor management decisions. Amidst the chaos, I retreated to my apartment, watching the drama unfold from afar. Part of me felt vindicated, knowing I'd been right all along. Another part mourned the loss, not just of the deal, but of the opportunity to prove myself, to show everyone what I was capable of achieving. As days turned into weeks, life at Nexus returned to a semblance of normalcy. The initial frenzy subsided, replaced by quiet resentment and finger-pointing. Rumors swirled about upcoming layoffs, restructuring plans, and whispered threats of lawsuits. Yet, amidst the turmoil, one question lingered in my mind, refusing to let go. Who exactly had orchestrated my downfall? The question gnawed at me day and night. Who had orchestrated my downfall? It wasn't just idle curiosity, it was survival. If I wanted to reclaim any semblance of control over my career, I needed answers. And so, as the dust settled around Nexus Global, I began piecing together fragments of information like a detective combing through clues. My first step was retracing my steps. I thought back to every interaction, every offhand comment, every sidelong glance that might have hinted at ulterior motives. One name kept surfacing in my mind: Daniel Harper, a senior vice president known for his calculated ambition and ruthless climb up the corporate ladder. He'd been conspicuously absent during the meeting where Marcus questioned my competence, but present enough in prior discussions to subtly undermine my authority. Daniel wasn't overtly hostile. He was far too clever for that. Instead, he operated with a quiet precision, planting seeds of doubt without ever appearing malicious. I remembered how he once remarked, "It's impressive how much sway you seem to hold with Sheikh Rashid," his tone laced with faux admiration. At the time, I brushed it off as harmless flattery. Now it felt like a red flag. I decided to dig deeper. Using old contacts from my MBA program and connections within the company, I started gathering intel. What I uncovered painted a chilling picture. Daniel had been quietly lobbying against me for months, positioning himself as the true architect of the Al Mazir deal while portraying me as an unreliable wild card. According to one source, he'd even gone so far as to fabricate the supposed IP concession request, feeding misinformation to Marcus under the guise of protecting the company's interests. But why? Why go through all this trouble to sabotage someone who posed no real threat to him? The answer came from an unexpected source: Greg Thompson, the man who replaced me. over drinks one evening. Him drowning his guilt in whiskey, me pretending to be sympathetic. He confessed that Daniel had promised him a promotion if he played along with the narrative that I was incompetent. Greg admitted feeling remorseful now that the deal had collapsed, realizing too late that he'd been used as a pawn in Daniel's game. Armed with this knowledge, I faced a choice. I could let it go, lick my wounds, and move on, or I could fight back. But fighting back wouldn't be easy. Taking on someone like Daniel required more than evidence. It required strategy. So I devised a plan. Phase 1 involved rebuilding alliances. I reached out to colleagues who had witnessed Daniel's manipulations firsthand, appealing to their sense of justice and self-preservation. Many were hesitant at first, wary of crossing someone as powerful as Daniel. But when I presented them with concrete examples of his deceit, including emails and recorded conversations, they began to see the bigger picture. Slowly, a coalition formed, united by a shared desire to expose the truth. Phase 2 was trickier, getting Marcus on board. As CEO, Marcus held ultimate power, but he also had a reputation for valuing loyalty above all else. Confronting him directly risked alienating him further, so I took a different approach. I arranged a private meeting, framing the conversation not as an accusation, but as an opportunity for redemption. "Marcus," I began, sitting across from him in his corner office, "I know things didn't end well with the Almazir deal, but I believe we can learn from what happened. For the sake of the company and your legacy, I think it's important to understand why." He listened intently as I laid out the timeline of events, presenting my findings methodically. When I mentioned Daniel's role in spreading false information, Marcus stiffened, his jaw tightening. "Are you accusing Daniel of sabotage?" he asked sharply. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm presenting facts. Whether or not you choose to act on them is up to you." It was a gamble, but it paid off. Marcus prided himself on being a decisive leader, and the idea of having been manipulated infuriated him. By the end of our meeting, he agreed to launch an internal investigation into Daniel's conduct. The investigation sent shockwaves through Nexus. Documents were subpoenaed, testimonies recorded, and skeletons unearthed. It turned out Daniel's scheming extended beyond just the Almazir deal. He'd been embezzling funds, falsifying reports, and strong-arming junior employees into doing his bidding, all while maintaining a veneer of professionalism. When confronted with the evidence, Daniel tried to deny everything, but the weight of the accusations crushed him. Within weeks, he was fired, his reputation in tatters. For me, vindication came in waves. My position at Nexus was restored, along with a promotion to Director of Strategic Partnerships. More importantly, I earned something far greater than a title: respect. Colleagues who once dismissed me now sought my counsel, recognizing the value of both my expertise and resilience. Even Marcus apologized personally, acknowledging the mistake he'd made in doubting me. Yet, despite the triumph, I couldn't shake the lingering bitterness. The collapse of the $7.5 billion deal had cost Nexus dearly, and while Daniel's downfall brought some measure of justice, it couldn't undo the damage. Still, I refused to let anger consume me. Instead, I channeled it into action. Months later, I found myself seated across from Sheikh Rashid Al Farhan in a luxurious suite overlooking the Abu Dhabi skyline. After the fallout, I'd reached out to him directly, apologizing for the mismanagement and expressing my hope to rebuild trust. To my surprise, he agreed to meet. Over tea and dates, we discussed the possibility of reviving the partnership, not as a merger, but as a joint venture focused on sustainable development projects in the Middle East. As we shook hands to seal the agreement, I felt a profound sense of closure. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful not just for myself, but for the lessons I'd learned along the way. That power is fleeting, integrity is priceless, and sometimes the hardest battles yield the sweetest victories. And so Layla Hassan emerged stronger, not because she won, but because she endured. With Daniel exposed and removed, Layla reclaimed her place at Nexus, earning both a promotion and the respect she deserved. She rebuilt trust with Sheikh Rashid, paving the way for a new partnership. Though scars remained, Layla emerged stronger, proving that resilience could turn betrayal into triumph. In the end, it wasn't just about winning, it was about rising above.